all of AP Macro Unit 2, the circular flow model, which shows how money and goods and services move in an economy. Businesses give goods and services to households, and households give the factors of production, land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship to the firms. And then households give money to firms for goods and services, and firms give money to households as compensation for the factors of production. But the big thing you need to know about the circular flow model is that it shows that total expenditure and total income are the same. GDP, or gross domestic product, is the total market for all goods and services produced within a country's borders. So GDP equals the price of all goods sold times the quantity of all goods sold. And it only includes new goods and services, the final product, anything within the borders, and only newly made goods. So something made 2 years ago being sold would not be counted in GDP, or something made outside of the US or whatever economy you're dealing with would not be counted in GDP. But GDP excludes goods and services made last year or any year that's not this year. Intermediate goods, which would be goods like machine parts that aren't part of the final product. Financial assets like stocks and bonds. Transfer payments, which are just government payments to a citizen, like a welfare check or unemployment benefit. Home production, black market sales, and anything outside the borders. There are multiple ways to track GDP. You can track people's spending, and the acronym you can use for this is CIGNE, consumer spending plus investment spending plus government spending plus net exports equals GDP. Net exports are just your exports minus your imports, and investment spending is any spending on capital goods, changes in inventories, and new home sales. So just remember the acronym CIGNE. You can use the income method. The acronym you can use for this is WIRP, wages plus interest plus rent plus profits. Or you can use the value added method, which is the value of the goods sold versus the value of the production costs, which is just what you spent to make the good. For the most part, you're only going to be using CIGNE, but there might be some questions on these two methods. But I'd say 90% of the time you're using CIGNE. Nominal GDP is the value of output at current year prices. So it's the current price times the current quantity. Real GDP, or adjusted GDP, is the value of output at a base year price. So you take the price from like 2020, for example, and you'd multiply it by the current quantity of all goods sold. The reason you would do this is to track whether the quantity of your goods is increasing, not the price. Another way to calculate our GDP is you take your nominal GDP and you divide it by something called a GDP deflator, and you multiply it by 100. I'd say 99.9% of the time you're going to be given the GDP deflator, so you're not going to have to worry about calculating it. And GDP per capita is just your GDP divided by your population. And the GDP per capita is just a good way to determine the quality of life of your economy. Next, we're going to be talking about unemployment. So you have your population as a whole, and then it can be split into your civilian working age population. Your civilian working age population is just people over 16 who are not in mental hospitals and are not in the military. And your civilian working age population can be split up into your labor force and not in your labor force. The labor force is just your unemployed plus your employed. Employed people have a job. Unemployed people don't have a job but are looking for work, actively looking for work. And people who are not in your labor force don't have jobs and aren't looking, which are just discouraged workers. Below are some equations that you need to know regarding unemployment. So employed plus unemployed equals labor force. Unemployed divided by your labor force times 100 is your unemployment rate. And your labor force divided by your civilian working age population is your labor force participation rate. There are 3 types of unemployment that you have to know. Frictional, which is just when someone's in between jobs for normal reasons. Either they got laid off or they're looking for a new job. Structural, which is when there's a change in skills demanded, which causes a job to be unneeded. like in AI automating certain industries. Or cyclical unemployment, which is unemployment due to a contraction in the economy. Frictional and structural unemployment are healthy for an economy and are expected, while cyclical is bad for economy. The natural rate of unemployment is the rate of unemployment that economists target. It's usually 4 to 6%, and this includes only frictional and structural unemployment. In the short run, this is called the full employment. And your actual unemployment, which is your total unemployment at a given time, is the natural rate plus cyclical unemployment. The natural rate is always going to be 4 to 6. Anything else is cyclical. Unemployment can be shown on the production possibilities curve. When you're at your natural rate of unemployment, you're producing on your curve as a point of efficiency. Anything higher than that is inefficient because you're not making use of all of your labor, so it's going to be inside the curve. And anything lower than the natural rate of unemployment is unsustainable, so it's going to be outside your curve. This graph shows the business cycle. The dotted line shows the potential GDP, while the blue line shows actual GDP. As you can see, actual GDP isn't always linear, so there's going to be peaks and troughs. A recession is when there are 2 or more quarters of a contraction. And optimal output is at the intersection between potential and actual, or in this case, the intersection between the blue line and the dotted line. Aggregate price level measures overall prices in an economy. An increasing APL means inflation, while decreasing APL means deflation. A market basket is a collection of goods and services in an economy, and a price index is the cost of the current market basket as a percentage of a base year or last year's market basket. And calculating the price of a market basket is just the price times the quantity of each good. The equation for the price index, or PI, is the new year cost of the market basket, so the current year market basket, divided by a base year cost of the market basket, times 100. And finally, to calculate your inflation rate, it's this year's price index minus the previous year's price index divided by the previous year price index times 100. If your previous year is your base year, then you can just put 100 in for your previous year PI. So just to review, nominal is the prices of today, current prices, while real are adjusted values using base year prices. A shortcut you can use to calculate real is nominal minus inflation equals real. This can be used with any short or simple calculations that you need to do. There are 3 consequences to unanticipated inflation. Number 1, the consumer loses purchasing power. An example of this is if there's 6% inflation in a year, but someone's wage only increases 3%, then you use the equation from last slide. 3% minus 6%, that's negative 3%. So it's a loss in purchasing power. Savers and investors lose because the money that they put into the bank is less valuable when they take it out if the money is inflated. And borrowers gain while lenders lose. This is only with a fixed interest because borrowers have to repay lenders with less valuable money. And these are economic goals that economists have to try and target. Our GDP, or real GDP, is usually around 3 to 5%. Unemployment rate is 4 to 6%, and inflation rate is 1 to 3%.